from the West Coast, the East Coast, and deep in the heart of Texas, it's the Geek at Arms podcast with Brian, Mike, and James.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the newest episode of the Geek at Arms podcast, a podcast about three guys who share a lot of geeky hobbies and also a love for the Lord our God. I'm James, and hanging out with me are my good friends, Mike and Brian. But today, on this New Year's episode, we have a couple of special guests. Joining us today are Ashley and Jenny. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
They come from a pair of podcasts which need no introduction, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us where they are from anyway. Ashley, tell us about yourself and where people can find you.
Yeah, hey, I am on the Min-Max podcast with my husband, Alan, and our friend, Kyle. My husband and I are currently living in Nashville. We're still new to it, so it doesn't feel like we live here because we moved during the pandemic. So we're just kind of like, I feel we're kind of like haunting Nashville more than anything.
You basically just exchanged one set of walls for another at this point.
Yeah, it feels very bizarre. But I'm working for an Episcopal church as a communications director, which is really fun because I get to connect with people online, which we've been doing through the podcast for years now. And it's been really great to kind of imagine new ways to develop religious community in this really strange time. So while I totally get why it's stressful for people in other ways, it's actually been really fascinating brainstorming with a church that's actually very open to this kind of change, which is rare. So I'm kind of just eating it up.
Nice. And I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Jenny, and you can find me on the podcast Saving the Game. I'm one of three hosts. The other two are Grant and Peter. And in my personal life, I am a librarian. I run a very small library in rural Ontario, which has been interesting recently. I mentioned before we started recording, actually, I was surprised that and I'm a little bit exhausted today because people actually came into the library.
How dare they?
How dare the scandal?
I know.
But yeah, so it's been very quiet the last little while, and that's been very odd because my library is known as the loud one. I call it the Loudbrary. And it's because it mostly caters to kids and retirees. And that's an interesting set of demographics to work with. And that's basically what I've been doing the last couple of years.
Now, Jenny, as a librarian, I wanted to ask you, are you familiar with the podcast Welcome to Night Vale?
Oh, very, very much, very much.
Okay, because I've always been curious. Are libraries actually that dangerous? Do all librarians go to work in hooded dark robes?
Yes.
And when you have children's programs, they usually end with the children forming some type of rebel alliance to overthrow you and save the community?
Yes.
That's what I thought. That sounds about right. Okay.
I knew it.
And whatever you do, don't go to the dog park.
We don't actually have a dog park.
That's what they want you to think.
A park that makes really strange noises in the wind and might be haunted. So that's just as good, I guess.
Yeah. Well, once again, ladies, thank you for being here. Brian, how are you doing today, good sir?
I am doing pretty good. I've got my hot chocolate. I've got my space shuttle slippers on and a sweater. It's down to about 70 degrees here in Los Angeles, so, frigid.
Believe it or not,
Brian. It is slushing in Boston now. We have rain, we have snow, and it's making asphalt snow cones on my driveway. I want you to take the frigid back.
Is it weird that I'm
I had
actually
to
kind
scrape.
of jealous of your slush?
Oh, yeah.
You can have it. Come here. It's free for the taking.
I'll take the slush over the inch of ice I had to scrape off my windshield this morning that made me late for work.
Yes, hard yes. Yeah,
So.
Slush is far better.
Yeah, deep here in the heart of Texas, we had a low this morning of about 40. And I stepped outside and go, ooh, that's brisk. It's warmed up to 64, though. So to me, it feels great. To everyone else in Texas, getting this cold this early in the season, panic is starting to set in.
Like,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, if it's 8 degrees, it's still biking weather. So
Around here, it gets down to about 75, and people start putting on their parkas. It's hilarious.
Oh my goodness. That's so funny that you guys mentioned that, because I was missing snow, and I happened to just make a joke online about how when we were living in Chicago, I would complain about the cold all the time. And now that we're here, I was actually missing it and like was waxing philosophical about it. But I was totally making fun of myself and my sort of like fickle opinions about weather. And people got so defensive about 60 degrees that I was like, what is happening?
I saw that. I was like, I'm going to chime in here. Ooh, I am walking away.
Yeah. Smart.
Oh, yeah.
What about you, Mike? How have you been doing?
I thought I covered that when I said that it was slushing on my driveway. No,
Well,
I'm doing all right. Doing all right. Moving
Glad
right
to hear
along.
it. All right. Well, let's jump into Geek Out. And as is tradition with our guests, we shall let them go first. And Ashley, you shall go first.
Cool. Sounds good. I've been geeking out about the fact that I have the time to actually like, sit down and read for fun lately. Way more than I have in the past several years. And the thing that the genre that I tend to lean towards the most or go after the most has been a lot of like surrealist fiction, especially surrealist horror. And so as soon as I got my library card, because I don't feel like I live somewhere until I have a library card, well before I get a driver's license.
Priorities, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I started pulling books off the shelves, and an author I actually got to meet in the UK when we lived there was Max Porter. And I don't know how familiar anybody is with his work, but his like big book that came out was his debut novel. It's called Grief is a Thing with Feathers. And they produced a show, like an actual play that Cillian Murphy was in. And it's really very bizarre. Like you kind of have to go into it very open because it's about this family who's, lost their mother, wife, and this really strange character called Crow, who is an actual giant crow, comes in and is like a manifestation of their grief ultimately. But the ways that grief are described and the ways the perspectives of the two boys and the father are described are really beautiful. And it's a book that even when you finish it, you want to pick it up and read it again because you'll get something new out of it. But the reason I met him was because he was doing a book tour for a new book that he had just published last year called Lonnie, which is also very bizarre and has to do with like the lore of the around the Green Man in Scotland.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's very creepy. It kind of takes like a more Stephen King approach to horror. It's just like unsettling, and it has to do with like a small community, and the antagonist kind of like eats gossip ultimately and eats like sort of like antagonistic feelings between people. And
I have family members that are like that.
And so again, it focuses on this family, a mother and a father, and their son Lonnie, who has great artistic ability and gets together with a local neighbor who starts to teach him how to improve his artistic ability. But there are some like rumors going around, etc. So that's also a very beautiful and sad novel, but really beautiful. But the reason I'm kind of freaking out about him lately is because he just recently announced a new book coming out that'll come out next year called The Death of Francis Bacon. That actually has very little to do with Francis Bacon specifically, but everything to do with the process of death and dying. And so it's like a much more almost like, again, it's relatively surrealist. So he's just kind of exploring the process of losing one's grip on their own life and what that kind of looks like just in text. And the reason I love him as much as I do is when I got to talk to him, the way he writes is actually intended to be performative. Like he cares about the performance of a text. He doesn't like things to just stay on the page flat. So it's not just about, what is represented through syntax and punctuation and such. He also plays with font, and not in the sense of like he writes in papyrus. That's not the type of thing. But like even like slight differences in font size, or he'll use two different in Lonnie. He'll use like two different fonts, and one will be serif and one will be without serif. But the change is slight enough that you don't actually notice it until you go back. And I had actually engaged with Lonnie as an audiobook before I read it in text, because I bought it at that book signing. And so in the audiobook, they had differences in tone when the antagonist would come in and come out of the narrative. In the text, you don't get that like direct change in voice quality. You get a change in font styling, so serif and sans serif. And so he does really, really subtle things like that, or he'll like frame text in such a way that you kind of have to be paying attention to his patterns to notice when a character changes, or suddenly if like they change scene entirely. But it makes it kind of like a fun mystery almost, and it makes it so subtle that it actually engrosses you in the story far more, and it immerses you in the narrative in a way that you wouldn't have thought of before, or thought was possible with something like a novel. I mean, all literature is immersive in some regard, but he takes it in another level to where you actually feel like you're involved in something that extends beyond the page in a way that is, it just seems a lot different than just, say, enjoying a story like, Harry Potter or anything else that we really enjoy, The Last Unicorn, etc. It's involving your actual perception in a way that goes beyond, I think, typical storytelling. So I love him to death. Also, he told a fart joke during his book signing. The fact that an Englishman could stand in front of a crowd of very sort of stiff upper lip Scots and tell a fart joke really just won me over in a big way. So huge fan. If you have a chance, definitely check out his work.
Before I jump into my Geek Out, Ashley, may I make 2 recommendations?
Please do.
For horror?
Yes.
So, you may already have read them. They aren't terribly new or anything like that. Are you familiar with And the Trees Crept In by Don Kurtagich?
No.
Do it!
That's a fantastic title.
I'm grabbing a pen.
Okay. You got the pen?
That sounds amazing. Yeah, I do.
Okay, good. So yeah, that's And the Trees Crept In by Don Kurtagich, which I've only read the audiobook. I've not read the physical book, but apparently it does similar things with typography.
Oh, nice.
And a sort of a slow descent into madness.
I love that.
There you go. So yeah, that one's a YA horror.
Okay.
I was not terribly scared as an adult, but had I read it about 10 years ago, oh my goodness, I would not have slept. And I'm thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid.
Okay.
Which has recently been apparently poorly adapted into a movie on Netflix. That one is just bizarre. You will be deeply uncomfortable. You will not know why.
That's how I felt about reading House of Leaves. I was reading it and everyone thought I was doing homework because it looks like a textbook.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, no, I'm just fixating on these footnotes because they're telling a really unsettling story on top of an already unsettling story.
I'm fascinated by any work of fiction that has footnotes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh goodness! If you're looking for footnotes, can I make another recommendation?
I mean,
we long enough, I can make this a clockable hour in my reader's advisory section on my timesheet. Powers of Darkness. Powers of Darkness, which is the
oh my gosh,
the thing, the Dracula translated into Icelandic, translated back to English. Oh my goodness, the footnotes. Some of them are so funny. Because it's like the translator, the more recent translator, it's like he knew, because like no spoilers because it's right at the beginning, it's like 2 pages in, but it's like it appears that this particular Dracula is a little bit more anxious to get to know what's his face, Jonathan Harker. Yeah, looks like he's a little more anxious to get to know Jonathan Harker because he appears as a bat very, very quickly here. It's just like,
interesting.
Yeah, just lovely little footnotes all over the place. It's like 90% footnote. I love it.
I'm reminded of the core rule book for the RPG Unknown Armies.
Yeah.
It had footnotes as well. Some of them would make you laugh. Some would make you go, "Huh, that's silly," and others would send a little jolt of ice up your spine.
Lovely.
See, usually when I'm reading a book, it's the footnotes that this just sounds so bad. It's the footnotes that really get my attention, that are really, have the really exciting tidbits. But of course, I'm also a lot of times reading historical books and fencing manuals and things of that sort. But
So we're geeking out about footnotes.
We are. I am also geeking out about books, but in a bit of a different way. This was the year that I got really into reading challenges, specifically the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge, which is a set of 40 to 50 reading prompts. So it's like, read a book. One of the ones for this past year was read a book with a bird on the cover. And some of them are a little trickier, like one of the ones for this upcoming year is read a book with a family tree in it. I'm like, oh man, I don't want to read Lord of the Rings again.
Oh no, they have this new thing. It's called the Silmarillion. You'll love it.
No.
Real light reading. Don't worry about it all. You'll knock it out in an afternoon.
I blew through that book, believe it or not. I spent so many hours in airports that summer. I didn't have anything else to do.
And speaking of footnotes.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, that's been my big thing for like the whole dang year. And now I have one prompt left, and that's a book with a map in it. And I'm probably going to use Powers of Darkness, that, or 5 Days at Memorial, which is about, it's a sort of a reconstruction of 5 days at Memorial Hospital in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, and the 5 days where basically doctors had to decide who lived and who died, and it was very, very hard on them. I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish that one by the end of the year. It's really, really, really heavy right from the get-go.
Yeah,
sounds like it.
Who knows? Who knows? It will probably be Powers of Darkness.
There are a couple of things I've picked up during the pandemic, and I'm like, I can totally read that. I cannot read this during the pandemic. No, that's that's too bleak.
Somebody at some point, I've got a list of books that have been recommended to me, and the next one on the list was one called Earth Abides. It's like, I have no idea what this book is about, so it was on my list. I opened it up, and in the first chapter, like 99% of the world's population dies from a disease. I'm like,
Nope.
yeah. This is not good timing.
I did that with a few RPG adventures, like, what shall I do with our group? There's a plague on. Nope.
So I tend not to talk about the kids game that I was running on Saving the Game, mostly because they're all minors and they can't consent to me, talking about the game that we're all playing. But I will say the storyline that I took them through, literally the 2 weeks before we shut down, was you have to save an entire village from the plague.
Oh no.
They did do it.
So they failed then. That's what you're getting at. That's why
no,
we're
it's
dealing
like
with this
in
right now.
Okay.
In the game, the quest was to wear a mask, stay 6 feet away from others, and wash your hands. And the kids did it, and they were safe.
Yeah.
Well done. How they got that orcish horde to do the same was amazing. I mean, talk about some power rolls.
Honestly, I was mostly impressed because the way that they did it was I sent them up a mountain to get a particular herb that was guarded by a bunch of rocks. Rock as in ROC, like the really big bird. I'm surprised none of them got carried away by a rock. At least not for terribly too long. The wizard did get picked up and flown away for a little bit, but not too long. He got free. It's fine.
Very cool.
I'm thinking that could be pretty terrible when somebody says, "Oh, the wizard's picked up by a large flying creature." No, wait a minute. I've seen Dragon Slayer. I know how we can solve this. Like, wait, no.
Well, I have been geeking out quite a bit about this new virtual tabletop called Foundry. Somebody on the MinMax Slack pointed it out to me. It's like, Roll20 it's good and it's powerful. It can do a lot of stuff, but it's really clunky in a lot of ways. And to get some of the better features in it, you have to pay monthly. So I wasn't real wild about spending any more money, but they had a Black Friday sale. Got the thing for, I think, $36. It's normally $50.
Oh, nice.
And it's a really slick interface. It's very, very good presence on your screen. It runs smoothly. Unfortunately, none of the games that I want to play have systems in it. So I'm also learning how to build systems and modules from scratch in the thing, which involves a lot of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I'm not real wild about JavaScript, but I can do it. So I have been digging into the guts of that and trying to reconstruct Tales from the Loop in Foundry. It's a lot of fun.
Nice.
Then I guess I'll go next. I have been playing Time Stories for, I think, about 2 years. Time Stories, if you haven't heard of it, is a cooperative, story-driven game where you buy a deck, and what you do is you are given a mission, you're time agents, and you're going through time to various locales to solve something that has gone wrong with the timeline. And you do this quantum leap style. So you take your consciousness and you project it into a vessel, into a carrier that is there at the time that you want to make alterations. And you take basically that person's stat card. And in some of these games, you can jump in and out of different people that are there in the time period. And so it has some really cool puzzle solving and exploration and narrative elements. And we have been building up to playing I guess you can call the series finale or the season finale, Madame. And Time Stories has had some absolutely wonderful things going for it because they have this subplot where there's another kind of another agency that is also using the same technology as you. And there's kind of this building conflict. And even in spoilers for the previous, I guess the penultimate chapter, it can end with some endings of you having a bag over your head as you're abducted, either by a faction in your own agency or by this alternate agency, the Scions.
Interesting.
That's so cool.
But
it is so cool.
But can you answer me this? Does Dr. Sam Beckett ever make it home?
You actually cross paths with Sam Beckett in the game.
You do not. You shut up. You do not.
No, it's a lie. It's a lie. No.
Because I was about to get on Amazon and order every single one of those if you did.
Well, speaking of ordering every single one of those, we'll get to that in just a second because we did. And they have this wonderful thing where it looks like a side quest in almost all of the games where you find a cube and it looks like very otherworldly tech and very, it's like, this stands out. This is special. This is something. And it tells you on the card, hang on to it. You might use it in another adventure. And so you've just been collecting these for 8 games and not really knowing why. And there's also a couple of our players had been infected with something in a previous chapter, and it says you are attracted to anything that is the color green. I'm like, okay,
Casual.
this is leading to something. Let's take all these subplots. Let's bring it to the finale. Let's open up Madame. We're gonna do this. And though you might have ended with a bag over your head, you just kind of go to work the next day.
Huh.
I'm like, okay. So there's no alternate opening? Oh, okay. This will make sense as we go through. I mean, the Scions are going to come into where did the Scions go? I mean, they might be responsible for this time home, but okay. Moving on. Do you know what? That's fine. You can't get a home run every time. Oh, all those cubes that we've been collecting are absolutely necessary to solve the final puzzle in Endgame?
Oh, no.
Oh, wait. You need actual physical copies of all of those on hand to make the end solvable?
Oh, no.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. We're going to do this. We've been slogging at this episode for the last 6 hours. We'll do it. And then we solve the final puzzle, and then we scan the QR code and we enter the puzzle solution in. And the message we get is pretty much akin to, be sure to drink your Ovaltine.
Oh.
You're gonna straight up give me an ad to the new series of Time Stories you're doing. Okay.
Oh, gosh.
So I'll say this, Time Stories is an amazing set of adventures. Once you because it is very highly narrative, high puzzle solving, high cooperation. It's fantastic. The art is brilliant. They have some that are hit and miss, but if you go play all the way through a very piratey one, Brotherhood of the Coast, and once you finish Brotherhood of the Coast, write fanfic. That's my recommendation.
Yeah, Time Stories is always one of those games that Alan and I pick up on the shelf and we stare at it and we're like, someday we'll own you. And then we always put it back.
It's one of
I've
those
done that
ones,
a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where I also pick it up and look at it and I'm like, I really, really want to play this. And no one else that I know in person wants to play this with me.
No.
If it wasn't pandemic and it wasn't like, I don't know, like a 2-day drive, I'd bring my copy. We could play. I'd be fine with that.
Someday we're bound to meet up at a con someday.
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Well, we got a con planned at your church, don't we?
Yeah. It's funny. It was funny trying to explain that to the rest of the staff during our staff meeting, which was the best part of my day, honestly. Because they're like, wow, we got a lot of traction on that one tweet. And I was like, let me explain the internet to you.
Like, yeah, Ashley had made a post on her church, and Gregory Oswald, who's a listener of Saving the Game and
All the podcasts.
and all the podcasts,
Yeah.
all of us, we're just kind of going back and forth, like, oh no, this is kind of the midpoint between us and this person and this person and this person. Let's just show up when the pandemic is over for their first potluck Sunday. It'll be a podcast GeekyCon. This is going to be great.
Yeah.
I will have never been more popular than when that day arrived. And people will be like, who did we hire?
Well, that's what they say is you want to find a property with a built-in fan base. So that's what they did.
Yeah.
So that'll wrap it up for my Geek Out.
All right, I will finish things off. This past month has been a really slow one geek-wise because it's been such a busy one life-wise. A lot of working from home. My kids' daycare got shut down for a couple of weeks, so they were home with us, and that was fun. He says as his left eye won't stop twitching.
I love my family staying in a house with them all during the pandemic. It's wonderful. I recommend it to everyone.
Yeah. I told one person, yeah, that having the kids at home is great. In fact, I'm going to start a new hobby. Oh, yeah, what? Drinking.
I thought you were going to say, like, beanbag toss or something like that, but with kids.
No,
We had a moment.
that would mean I'd have to, let them loose from the duct tape.
Long form hide and seek. You go hide, and next week I'll come find you.
That's right. I just hear voices from the backyard. Dad, we're ready. I'm on the couch with my Xbox controller. You're doing great, kids. Be there in a minute. But I have had a chance to do a few things. I was able to wrap up watching both The Mandalorian and Discovery, both of which were thankfully fantastic. The highlight for me was, and I talked about this a couple of times, how the character of Ahsoka Tano was rumored to make an appearance on The Mandalorian, and she did, played by Rosario Dawson, who nailed it. It was a delight to see her on the screen, and the entire episode, that entire arc between her, the Mandalorian, and the child was great. One of the best science fiction episodes, not just of Star Wars, but of anything that I've seen in a long time. And it got me thinking, did you guys hear about one of the guys behind The Mandalorian, Jon Favreau, who is behind The Mandalorian and some other great works happening there at Disney? Did you hear that he was in an accident?
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. There's like a lot of spinal damage, hernia.
Discs ruptured, a whole lot of problems with his back, all because he's been carrying the Star Wars franchise for the last several months. So let's give it up to that guy. Anyway, those shows have been wonderful. I have finally had a chance to sit down with my wife and play a board game. Upon Mike's recommendation, she had bought for me a few months back for our anniversary the game Castles of Mad King Ludwig.
Oh, so good.
Which was very fun. My only problem with it was that she brought it out to play just after we had had a big holiday dinner. So we just finished clearing the table. I'm sitting there feeling like a bear that's been shot in the butt with a tranquilizer dart. I'm ready for maybe a little more pie and a hibernation. And she just brings out the box, boom, puts on the table. Let's play.
She wiped the walls with you, didn't she?
Okay. She did win. She absolutely did win, but I'm not going to lay the blame to that on my inability to think or move. She's just a fantastic player in her own right. So
I mean, she's sharp. So
yeah, but even though I was ready for a good 40, 80, 3-month sleep, it was a lot of fun to play, and I'm slowly making my way through my game closet. Actually, taking the plastic off of a game and playing it is always cause for celebration. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, my weekly role-playing game group, which I had been playing Tales from the Loop with, we wrapped up that campaign, and people were discussing what they wanted to play next. And lo and behold, our GM said, well, how about a Middle-earth role-playing game campaign using the old MERP system from ICE? To which I replied, yes, you have my sword, my bow, and my axe.
Well, granted, this came after a very poor attempt at Primetime Adventures that just did not work.
Nobody knew that, Brian. I wasn't going to mention that. Anyway, I haven't had a chance to play MERPs in over 20 years. Not since the last campaign that Brian actually ran for myself, my wife, and a few others. And I got a chance to pull out.
That was before you were married, too.
It was. I actually have copies of the old Middle-earth role-playing game, second edition rulebook, the Treasures of Middle-earth, and being able to use these resources again after so long is just been a pleasure. Right now, it's myself and 2 other players. And as I was thinking about, like, what character am I going to make? A ranger? A horseman from Rohan. I asked, guys, what are you playing? They both said, dwarves. All right, I'm a dwarf too now. So I don't know if we've decided that we're actually going to be all 3 dwarven brothers, which I actually think would be kind of a kick. But just creating a character again has been geeky fun in and of itself.
Yeah, it's going to be a very short game. I don't know how long it will last.
Yeah,
but
I think we're all going to die quick too. So.
No, I just meant because you're not very tall.
Yes, but we're very dangerous over short distances. And that is going to wrap it up for me, and I think that will wrap it up for Geek Out. We will head on to our main topic, and Ashley and Jenny have joined us today because we are going to be having a discussion on transhumanism, what it is, what are its moral, ethical, and spiritual implications, some examples in media, and also the most important question, is Mike actually the Kwisatz Haderach?
And
I'm going to go solid no on that one.
We invited Jenny and Ashley on because not many people know this, but they're actually both cyborgs. So you're going to get the first-hand perspective on this.
Yeah, that's why recording's so easy. I just plug myself into the computer.
Mm-hmm. So at any point, friends, while you're listening to this podcast, if you start to hear a digitized voice say resistance is futile, don't worry about it.
It's all fine.
It's all fine. No, nothing to worry about. It's all good.
Your technological and theological distinctiveness will be added to our own.
So, first off, for those who are unfamiliar with the subject, what is transhumanism?
Well, I guess I was the one who pitched this idea, so I'll start us off. The transhumanism is kind of a nebulous thing. It's a philosophy, it's a movement, and it's generally the belief that humankind can exceed our natural physical and mental limitations through the use of technology. We're talking about things like bionics, brain-machine interfaces, artificial intelligence, gene therapy, biotech, other even weirder advances. And these things have the potentially to have the blah, blah, blah. Brian can speak. He needs a cybernetic tongue. These things have the potential to change what it means to be human, to modify our definition of the species. And we wanted to cover this in a couple of different angles. First, as a narrative device in science fiction, because, as you know, we're all geeks and we read a lot and we watch a lot of movies and TV. So does anybody want to dig into that first?
I wouldn't. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, please go ahead. It's your podcast.
Like, all right. Like, you are our guest. We want you to feel at home and welcome.
That's the most kindness he's gotten
on.
on this podcast in forever. He's just not used to it.
Yeah.
I felt that short circuit for a second.
We're exploring this to some degree through the lens of science fiction because it's present there. It's an easy touch point for us. And we see transhumanism as a narrative device in science fiction because sci-fi is such a fertile ground for just exploring ideas, period. We have a suspension of our disbelief, and we have a desire to accept a world within a certain set of parameters. For example, Altered Carbon, which I don't necessarily recommend, but it's popular, it's out there. We don't know how the cortical stack in the back of their necks works. All that we know is that it stores a person's memories and backs up their consciousness, and it easily allows us to transfer a person from body to body. I say that Altered Carbon might not be for everyone, just content warning. So, it's our show is family friendly. Altered Carbon is not. So heads up if you go that route. Also, another example of the narrative device would be in the book Scythe and its series, that there's a lot in Scythe that we take for granted. The medical technologies advance far enough to keep everyone alive, well, and young effectively forever. And they can even bring somebody back from death, assuming a few of your cells survive. They can reconstruct your body and then download your consciousness back from the Thunderhead, and there you go, you're back to normal. We don't need to know how all those things work. We just accept it because that's the way our suspension of disbelief works.
I think it's also important to note that this is sort of, especially where a realm where sci-fi moves, especially from science fiction to speculative fiction, because I think right now we're sort of on the cusp of a really interesting moment where we can see some of these technologies about to actually happen in real life, which I think is super cool. And we can see a point where if you lose an arm, you might be able to get another one. And that might just not be a problem for you anymore. It lets us imagine these worlds where we don't have to face problems that we deal with on a daily, regular basis, like having a consciousness stuck in one body. We could like control our feelings. We could physically move faster and not hurt ourselves. It could get rid of illness. I kind of hope it doesn't get rid of death. Not gonna lie, it's not to be all like goth here, but
no,
I'm one of those folks who's like, death is definitely a part of life. We should maybe keep that in there.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jenny. I think the most of my notes, and this will shock nobody who's listened to Min-Max, but most of my notes are primarily in the theological and philosophical realm. And the thing I was going to say earlier before I let Mike take the floor was that transhumanism ultimately is like a subset of humanism. It's built off of Julian Huxley's essay from 1957 about this idea that not only can humans advance with the use of technology, but that they should. That is what humanity is built for, that we have the technology, therefore we should apply it to our own lives to be able to not only become better, but also it's if you take the guy who created, what is it called, Humanity Plus or Human Plus?
Humanity Plus.
Yeah, David Pierce. He basically argues for transhumanism as being committed to three supers: super longevity, super intelligence, and super well-being. And that can sometimes get confused with like futurism or post-humanism, which we can get into that if we want to. But it can get really interesting and a little bit messy with regard to narrative and speculative fiction, because then you have to kind of be assessing what the author's perspective on those terms are, and sometimes people mislabel their own fiction based off of how based on how optimistic or cynical they are about the topic. which can then get into some really interesting theological territory as far as like what Jenny said, you know, how comfortable are we about the idea of super longevity or, you know, trying to dodge death.
Some people would view it as a progression of what man has been doing all along. I mean, we've used our intelligence and technology to better the world around us. And so it's no large leap of logic to think that we want to use those to start bettering ourselves as well as much as possible.
Yeah, I think where I tend to get really sort of admittedly Ron Swanson-y about the whole thing.
I love that you use that.
is honestly when it starts to take the tact of not just bettering humanity or bettering the world and supporting people that need it, but becoming something other than human, and trying to go well above and beyond the scope of humanity itself, and that can be a larger discussion for sure.
That's
and
right.
I
Yeah.
you know, I don't want to drag my heels on something that will be for the benefit of people.
That's right. Designer genes and eugenics are not a part of the Swanson pyramid of manliness.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm glad that you brought that up. But I think when I look at it and it's kind of at its like least self-reflective, sometimes it can change from, you know, like Psalm 139, the whole I praise you for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, to I praise me for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's where I start to get honestly just like very sort of guarded about it. So that's why like when I'm reading sort of like speculative fiction stuff, I'm looking at what they're sort of having a discussion on and how they think it will serve or become a detriment to humanity. That's the kind of thing I'm always interested in when I look at this kind of narrative.
Yeah, for me,
Right.
it's always I when I am reading or consuming a piece of media that deals with transhumanism in every way, the thing that pushes me into the what I call the gitchy feeling realm,
Yeah.
or the squicky feeling realm, is where it feels like enhancement is required to participate in society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's where consent is removed from the equation. And one of my favorite YA series to read is the Uglies series by Scott Westerfeld. This isn't exactly, it pushes a little bit into transhumanism, not so much in the technology sense, but like technology applied to the human body, more like technology applied to society, where at the age of 16 everybody becomes pretty, as in they go into a massive like medical procedure to get their features enhanced to be, quote, like the best versions of themselves that they can possibly be, because some scientist had the great idea of, oh well, it's you know, scientifically proven that, quote, pretty people are, you know, put at an advantage above everybody else, so everybody should have that same advantage. And so you're basically required to undergo this process at 16, and it's like, but consent is important.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
just it squicks me out. Not so much that I stopped reading it, it was like literally my favorite series, but that's where I think I get pushed into like, maybe this isn't such a good idea. I also have concerns about like, what if it creates basically a class divide? So basically, if you're rich, you can afford these enhancements to make your life better, but if you're poor, you're dirt.
Yeah.
and you don't get the cool bionic legs that make you run super fast or whatever. Yeah, that's where my feelings are on it for the most part.
That's one of my fears for the future, is that when the day comes that we actually have all the technology that we've dreamed about and read about in comic books, I'm not going to be able to afford any of it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's
well-
funny because transhumanism actually has a history with libertarianism, which is entirely focused on personal liberty and, you know, yourself being of primary personal value. And so then taken at its sort of worst, that's exactly what it could become. So that's why
Mhm.
I think I'm always wanting to be as careful as I am.
Yeah.
And especially when we have these enhancements or advancements as regulations for medical problems or
Mhm.
problems with our biology. is that once you have the technology and it is implemented and it is safe and it is effective, again, who is it that gets it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is one of the problems where some of the concerns and problems with transhumanism simply throws a spotlight on problems that are already there.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
I am statistically more likely to get care for my problems than someone of a different demographic for a host of reasons. And once we start looking at these social and economic divides, this really this starts to squick me out, as you said, when we're like, okay, so we can get not designer genetics, but okay, people of this class can afford to have the genetic possibilities of genetic inheritable cancer. Wow, I'm forgetting the proper words. You can have edit out your genetic probability of getting cancer, and somebody who is not of that class cannot. Or is it covered by insurance? Yes, no, probably no. All right, it's no. So who gets it and who doesn't? And we have the advanced and enhanced class, and those who are unenhanced.
Yeah.
Or worse, we wind up in a situation where we've got mandatory enhancement to fulfill a need in society,
Mm-hmm.
where the underclass is being forced to undergo some kind of, okay, well, we need people who can lift a lot, so these guys get muscle enhancements. No, you don't get a choice. You got to get this because we need people who can lift the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If we've got a situation in which we've got this class divide widening, those people in the underclass don't have the power, the social power, to say no anymore.
I think there's also something, at least to me, that can get a little get you feeling squicky, where you are using something that is intended for a very specific medical purpose for fun, or for something that it shouldn't be used for. Oh my goodness, I get so many people so mad at me at work when they take out the one book we have on the keto diet. The keto diet was
Oh my
intended as a very specific medical diet for kids with severe epilepsy for whom medicine did not work.
Yep.
Inducing ketosis prevents a very specific type of seizure in a very specific type of epilepsy. And people are starting to use it to lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, but no, though, I'm sorry, ketosis is meant to make you feel terrible. It really is.
Yeah.
Ketosis is
Very
an
dangerous.
awful thing to have to go through. Why are you putting yourself through so much for basically a trend
Mm-hmm.
that could be done with just a simple low carb diet? There are so many low carb diets you can go on if you think that dieting is a thing you want to do to yourself. Like, dang, you don't have to go all keto, because it's like you don't have to put yourself through ketosis.
Let's face it, though, it's not the first time people have physically put themselves in danger because of a trend, and it won't be the last.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
at least we're not head sculpting anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think that this is also throwing a bit of a spotlight on where the blurry lines are between correction and enhancement. Like what is a feature that has some negative effects, and what is a bug? One of the things we talk about in our ethics classes is, okay, if we could find genetic tags to fix X, Y, or Z, who would be willing to take that responsibility? And then I guess the question is not just the responsibility for you, but for your children. I mean, you're doing it for someone else who cannot consent.
Yeah.
Yet. And so, okay, so we have you have the cancer gene. Should we edit that out? Like the entire class, almost the entire class, like, yep, we're gonna edit that out. Like, okay, blindness. Like, yep, totally, we're gonna do that. Like, well, what about the genetic tags for that causes someone to be a short person? Like, there's, if they're under 4'11", there's usually spinal issues that are involved. There are genetic tags for, I don't like the term dwarfism. What is used for that nowadays? I don't know. Maybe I should have looked that up before the show. But what about those? I'm like, I mean, yeah, okay, they're shorter lifespans generally and back problems. Sure. Like, okay. How about baldness? Well, no. Like ADD? Maybe I'd edit. At that point, when you have something that's labeled a disorder, at what point would you want to edit my ADD? I mean, James, I know you want to edit my ADD a lot. That's fine. That's normal. We do this, but
Me and Kaja have you on medication. We'll tell you about it later.
And when I was younger, I went down that meds route. And they adjusted, because I was a kid, I didn't know better. They adjusted my meds wrong. I mean, and that had effect.
Oh yeah, like I'm on ADD meds now, today, right now, immediately, and like adjusting them wrong literally almost made me starve myself because I was literally losing about a pound a day. That was just earlier this year. I'm finally back at my goal weight. I'm so happy. But like, let's not pretend that like changing something core to yourself will not have knock-on effects, because it absolutely will.
And some of these disorders are also culturally based.
Right.
There were things that are seen to cause suffering in Western society that in other cultures are just a feature. A friend of mine who was a social worker had said that he had read an article that in certain cultures, no one suffers from schizophrenia. It's a feature, like it is a part of their brain, that there are voices that, yes, they hear this, but this does not affect their quality of life. But in our highly individualistic mindset where, no, there's something in my brain, I'm hearing voices in my head, there's far more negative feelings attached to these experiences. So if we're thinking in a broader scale of what is a problem that needs to be fixed with humanity, it raises a lot more questions than we're used to grappling with.
Right, exactly. And I think that's like primarily what I'm concerned about is its use for making human interaction just more convenient for us, which I think I could see happening in the West relatively easily, which would then just further limit the time that we take to consider other people at all. And that's hard for us to do already. So
something that concerns me and about the idea of what is culturally acceptable or what we all agree on as a necessity as far as changes to be made to a person's genetic code. Like Mike, you said your class all raised their hands when it came to cancer and blindness. And that's because they all were aware of it and all accepted it. Yeah, those are problems that need to be corrected. Well, what happens when everyone's taught that blue eyes are a problem that need to be corrected, or brown hair?
I have an even a better idea. Why don't you walk up to somebody who's blind from birth and tell them that that's a problem that needs to be corrected?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And in this case, then the individual person's rights go out the door because everyone has agreed, yep, that needs to be changed. Oh, don't I get to say? No, because we all say that this is wrong and this is the way you should be. And so that's the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a creeping line there because, well, today it's cancer and it's born blind, and next week it's something else.
Yeah.
And we keep narrowing the definition of who's human. And then when somebody is well outside that norm, how do we treat them?
Yeah. And by even go ahead and saying that, oh, we need to take out the cancer gene or we need to add this one, the precedence is set. And once it's set, it can be changed, it can be modified, and it can be described in any way so that changes can be made at any point down the road. It's a very slippery slope.
And I mean, I don't want to label something as bad because there is a potential slippery slope. The slippery slope is one of those things where you have to say that A leads to B and B is necessarily a bad place to be. So we do really have to examine this slope and check for where we are along the way, where we want to go along the way. And, and it takes a lot of critical evaluation. Basically, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater that wigs you.
I completely agree with that. And I say that it's a slippery slope, all while saying that if someone said, hey, I could, with a few procedures, we could eliminate the cancer gene in your family, I would absolutely do it, because cancer has hit my family hard and I've lost family members to it. So the question is, and this is a question we all might have to address one day in the future, once that door is opened, is there a way to regulate it?
Well, and I think that's why we look at the science fiction, because it lets us ask these questions and it gives us a safe place to explore the potential consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm never a fan of like there's in the last couple years I've noticed a recent trend within writing and literary communities where it's like, oh, we can't write about this because such and such a thing is bad. Well, can there not be bad things in stories? Can we not, play around? Exactly. Can we not play around with these ideas and look at these potential slippery slopes? We should look at point A and see if point A leads to B, then what would point C look like, or point D even? That's
how we can ask ourselves the what ifs, and what if this were to happen in real life, and gives us ideas and pushes our imagination on how to deal with them.
Yeah, and how to avoid it if it's something to be avoided.
Yeah, not that we shouldn't like look at these things sensitively. We should absolutely look at these things with sensitivity. But I don't think we should shy away from any topic, especially because the more we look at human society as a whole, we look at stories to analyze our existence, and we look at stories to learn. We learn from stories better than we do a lot of the time from pretty much anything else, and that's across most cultures. It's why we have mythology. It's why we tell kids about the lake monster that'll eat you up if you go too close to the water, So yeah,
and I think actually bringing up stories and learning from stories, when I was pondering all these questions in the outline that you provided for us for this episode, I realized I had to put myself like on a sliding scale with my opinions about transhumanism based off of narratives that I've consumed that use like transhumanist narrative or theme. So like at my most cynical, I'm a BioShock, but at my most but at like my most optimistic or most hopeful, I'm Hippolyta Berry from Lovecraft Country. Like I don't know if you guys are familiar or have watched or even like read the book, because the book they've definitely changed a lot from the book to the show.
Yeah, have watched most of the show, have not read any of the book.
Okay. I really like what they did with Hippolyta's character in the show.
She's fantastic.
Yeah, she's I mean, arguably my favorite character. And she has an episode where it's probably the most like Afrofuturistic episode in the entire run of the series so far.
Oh yeah, that is straight Afrofuturism.
Yeah,
it goes from like surreal horror right into Afrofuturism, like
exactly. And I think it gives a really good example of how transhumanism could actually be like a really positive, uplifting thing, especially specifically in that the end of that episode, she's given the option to stay as she's become throughout all this technology that's been offered to her, or go back to her daughter. And it's a real choice for her. But she says this line that made me cry, and I'm probably going to misquote it, but it's something to the effect of like, how can I fit all of me back in there when I'm all of this? And she kind of like does like a space tumble is the best way I can describe it. But it's so beautiful because she had been given throughout the episode this opportunity to do all of these things and become this person that she'd hoped to be before she became a mother. And once she was given the choice, and I think this brings in the consent angle that Jenny was really wise to bring in, she chose to at the end of that entire journey to name herself mother in the end to her daughter. And it just made me, I was just weeping.
Because same here. I was just like, I was so glad that my parents were not in the house for that, because I was a mess, a dripping mess.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And so I think I was really grateful for that episode, because it put technology in a really beautiful light as opposed to like a really sanitary light. And used it as an object for growth as opposed to stunting. but in a way that was very healthy and organic, as opposed to something that was, overly engineered in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the spectrum I'm on when it comes to this topic.
Now I'm trying to put myself on like a sliding scale of like where I'm at.
Yeah.
I know personally for me, like I think my tastes in media tend to lean more towards like physical bionics, like like the actual mechanical arms and stuff like that. And maybe it's because I live in a very sciencey town. My dad is a nuclear chemist, and that we are very much into sort of engineering type things in our actual lives. So that's more where I'm at.
Yeah. Who among us wouldn't say absolutely yes if someone dropped an Iron Man suit right in our lap?
I actually might say no. Personally, me, I might say no. I do want very fast legs.
Well,
cool.
And
Then you get the bottom half, and I'll take the top half. We'll just share.
We're actually in a world now where a prosthetic leg can be superior to the natural legs. We got the Olympic Committee is still debating about those
the
blades.
Prostheses. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Because the gentlemen who were using them were clocking in times, not like a huge portion, but significantly faster than men and women running around on their own legs.
Now, granted, that partially solved itself because Oscar Pistorius was a horrible person and murdered somebody. But the fact remains that they're having to discuss whether or not somebody with a air quotes disability now has an actual advantage in these races.
Well, it's one of those things that there's a lot of conversations that happen around where I live, because MIT is literally all around me. And there was a professor at MIT who had a prosthesis, and he had the opportunity to invent other prostheses. And he's like, well, this is the prosthesis that I use for walking. This is the one that I use for mountain climbing. This is the one that I use for, just switching them out. Because he's in a position where he can have the best tool for the job. And sometimes that's a better tool than what he had. Now, granted, this is somebody who is in very much the minority. And he's not said, oh, I'm so happy I've lost my leg. But as we're looking forward to what can we do?
I've got to admit that as a sufferer of gout, there have been a few moments when I thought, if I just cut these off, this pain will go away.
Well, maybe Mike can introduce you to his friend who's got the mountain climbing. And
I'm kind of worried that phantom limb pain might be even worse, so I'm not going to go that route, but it's crossed my mind from time to time.
Yeah. Man, we've just been jumping all over this outline here. I'm sorry.
Welcome to our podcast. Should we move on to popular culture, or do we want to spend any more time on narrative device and where we would personally stand on the idea of transhumanism and making changes to ourselves and others around us?
I'm cool with moving on to pop culture. That's part of why I brought up Bioshock and Lovecraft Country, because I was trying to help transition.
Yeah.
But I don't want to speak for everybody though.
I think that's a good voice. That's a good voice. We're going to listen to that voice.
Well, speaking of Lovecraft, James talking, take two. Well, speaking of Lovecraft, you guys are just
edit none of this. Edit none of it.
Say it with an accent now. It might be easier.
Well, speaking of Lovecraft Country.
See?
Yeah, that sounds bad. Well, speaking of Lovecraft Country and Bioshock, let's take a look at transhumanism in various popular culture. The one that stands out to me first and foremost is Star Trek.
And this surprises nobody on this podcast.
Not a single one of you. Of course, we talked about the Wrath of Khan when we were talking with the Retro Rewind guys. And in the original series, it introduced us to the eugenics wars, genetically engineered superhumans, and what effect that they had on the Earth. Their existence and their actions led to the Third World War. And the worst among them was, of course, Khan Noonien Sung, who we were discussing before the show. played by Ricardo Montalban. He's just fabulous.
That would be Singh.
Yes.
Sung was the guy who invented data.
You're absolutely right. Khan Noonien Singh. And it brought me to mind of a quote that was made in the show about the superhumans, that superior ability breeds superior ambition. And of course, that's true in the show. Singh and his fellow superhumans tried to take over the Enterprise. Later, they tried to kill Captain Kirk and the Enterprise again in the movie. And by the time the Next Generation comes along, eugenics has been outlawed completely, to the point that if you are found even dabbling with it at all, you are sent to a comfy, cozy Federation prison planet.
They did explore that a little bit more in Deep Space Nine with the character of Julian Bashir, who was, spoiler warning for a show that's like 25 years old now. Bashir in later seasons was revealed actually to have been genetically enhanced.
Yeah. But if you recall, even though he didn't go to a prison planet, his father did.
But that line about superior ability didn't apply universally. Bashir was fully aware that he was smarter than everybody around him, but it didn't lead him to wanting to, well, most of the time it didn't lead him to wanting to become a megalomaniacal warlord. There were a couple of moments. Yeah. But
I will submit that once we did find out that he was genetically altered, he did become just a touch more insufferable.
Yes, well, that's true. Superior ability to breed superior
smugness.
Right? There's some other stuff in Star Trek. There was one particular storyline, the big bit with the Borg. They're a cautionary tale, but as I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking that there was a big missed opportunity that at some point when the Borg were being built the first time, somebody probably thought, hey, this is a great idea. Let's network our minds and we can communicate with one another instantaneously. And we can have this great instant communication with the entire species at once. And we didn't get to see the transition from that into the supervillains. And I think it would be a really interesting story to tell and to look at. And, it makes me want to write a spec script looking at that. But if I'm thinking about this idea, it's like, okay, well, what would be the genesis of that? What caused them to become this horrible universe-consuming force? And it's Twitter.
I'm not even going to argue with you about that. I buy it completely.
I mean, yes. On one hand, we can say that the Borg have gone down a dark path. But I think that darkness speaks more to our own human condition than it does the dangers of how we meld that technology. Mm-hmm. Because they are the perfect villain for a hyper individualistic culture. Yeah. That they are a threat to the thing that we prize the most, which is me, mine, I, and my thoughts, my headspace, my individuality. And this is particularly horrific to our culture because it threatens something that we're not even aware of us prizing to the degree that we do.
Mm-hmm. I think, and this isn't in the notes at all, it only just occurred to me, Babylon 5, very briefly, and I wish that they had expanded on this a little more. Babylon 5, for those who don't know, it's around the same time as it came out around the same time as Deep Space Nine. If you're looking for something, you know what, you should watch Babylon 5 instead of Deep Space Nine. But just gonna get that out of the way right now.
Yeah, Bab 5 has been brought up on this podcast many times.
Yeah, Babylon 5 is amazing. So they very briefly mentioned, I think with what's her name? Talia, I think?
Talia Winters.
Yeah, Talia Winters. What it is like for somebody who can essentially mind meld with another person to be in an intimate relationship with another person who can mind meld with people. Psionics, Psycor, not Psycor. Psycor is the big bads. But it's described as the loss of individuality not necessarily being a bad thing. And when you are in an intimate relationship with somebody who can share your your mind, you basically become this one beautiful infinity. And I think that's a fascinating way to look at it, that sort of goes the complete opposite direction of the Borg, where instead of, oh no, the loss of individuality, it's more the gain of infinity, which I think is such a beautiful way to look at it. I
Yeah.
think that's a very, very cool way to look at it.
Though, Brian, I think you are onto something with the Borg originating with Twitter, because when you think about it, every time they communicate with the Enterprise, it's always under 280 characters.
So there you go.
Oh, wow.
I'm not saying it's true, but we all might want to be careful. Start deleting some apps.
Well, Babylon 5 covered a lot of transhumanist ground.
Yes, it did.
Technologically and also spiritually, with the Psychor, the telepath plot lines.
Telepath, thank you,
Yeah, you're
telepath.
welcome. The Jason Ironheart, which was a terrible episode. Oh, that was so bad. But that notion of transcendence, where it's implied that at the end, John Sheridan transcended and became something else.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there was the Deathwalker storyline.
I was just about to bring up Deathwalker, yeah.
The consequences of immortality.
Well, I liked it that they showed that it wasn't just humans that were thinking of I guess this would be Transdilgar, because that's the species that Deathwalker belonged to. But the idea of improving self or improving others through technological and genetic means isn't an idea that is thought of only by the human race. I guess the Vorlons have been doing it for thousands of years.
Yeah.
There's one aspect of the Star Trek transhumanism that we kind of have in our notes, if I could dial back a little bit to that, in Lieutenant Commander Data. Because there is so much there, especially as he is exploring what it means to be him. And we as viewers are exploring what it means to have sentient artificial life that is functioning like a human being, but who is not a human being. And this is one of the questions that we get into with transhumanism, is what is an electronic consciousness? When is something sentient? And when does something deserve to be treated as a life form, and what sort of rights and ethics come into play with that, especially as we are kind of working in the direction of merging the biological and technological. And it kind of approaches this from another end, but transhumanism does try to explore the idea of what happens if we can upload a consciousness, or can we put a functioning human mind into a machine. And this starts with we have a functioning mind that we have created in the artificial intelligence. And there is a lot of exploration as to what does it mean for Data to be a sentient being, especially in the episode The Measure of the Man.
Mm-hmm.
And
probably the best TNG episode in my humble opinion. It's fantastic. It still holds up so well.
Yeah.
I don't know. Inner light. But that's beside the point. That's not transhuman.
I mean, and it tackles some of these questions that we've been dealing with since the Enlightenment. With, well, is Data a person? And what is a person? And how do we establish what personhood is? And one of the things that's kind of brilliant in that episode is Jean-Luc Picard has said, I can't deal with that philosophically. I cannot determine what a human is or what a person is. It's, spoiler alert to anybody who's never really gone down this path, it's a lot stickier than you think it is.
Yeah.
We might be covering that a little bit later in the show. Depends on how we work through this. But Picard decides that can't be the issue. That instead what becomes the issue is that of slavery, because we're talking about creating a mind for the purposes of doing something for us that we intend it to do. And I thought that was a fascinating angle to approach this problem, because there is the very difficult problem of what is a human, and we might not solve this in this court case.
Mm-hmm. I think if you guys don't mind me jumping in here with my main addition to the media topic. The Murderbot Diaries is a book series that I absolutely adore, and it is all about this kind of thing, but in a very humorous style of writing. Like, so if you're looking to explore this idea more, but you don't want to get super like heavy ethics textbook kind of thing with it, the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells is a very good way to go. But it's a story written from the point of view of a security unit, which in this universe is mostly robotic with a little bit of human brain and some human flesh bits in there, and 100% vessel for depression and anxiety, who
Right.
and this particular security unit or sec unit has turned off a part of their brain that would force it to to follow out all orders. So it basically gave itself a conscience because it was having to deal with its own very complex ethics questions, and so it just turned off the thing that was getting in the way. It's an excellent series for looking at what is human and what is appropriate in terms, or not appropriate exactly, but where in the future are we going to draw the line between making robots and exploiting robots, and the exploitation of a labor force that can't say no, kind of thing. Yeah, I love the Murderbot Diaries for that, and I adore the humor that it sort of takes with these, in the end, like, really, these are the kinds of questions that do actually literally keep me up at night. So I'm glad it can look at them with some kind of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very short. They're all novella length. They're all about 140 to 170 pages or so. Bite-sized little things.
Adding it to the Amazon list.
Do it.
Every time we have an episode of Geek at Arms, that list gets longer and longer.
Yeah. The finish line keeps moving further away.
And then the librarian comes on and our other guest, and suddenly it gets even longer still.
Please tell me that's what the title of this episode's going to be: The Librarian and the Other Guest.
Oh.
Well, it is now.
Someone has put Gattaca in the notes. Does anybody want to jump on that one?
I feel like we kind of already covered Gattaca with the gene editing thing at the beginning.
There was a lot that we were discussing, which was straight out of Gattaca.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
All that was missing was Uma Thurman making a guest appearance.
Rewind about 40 minutes and say Gattaca, and then that's where that goes.
Yeah.
There's one bit of transhumanist science fiction, Binti by Nnedi Okorafor, that is... Oh, it is fantastic.
I have yet to finish it, and I feel like a bad person for it, because that was one of the books that I bought for the library. Can you hear the quotation marks? But really, I haven't finished it yet.
I've always suspected that librarians abuse their position in that way, and I completely agree with it.
Very minor abuse. I give myself one book per business quarter. So that's 4 books a year that are mine, but live at the library.
Yeah, but that's also educated curating. So...
that's a really lovely term to give that.
She's going to pick a poster with that.
And that's how I'm going to argue my positions to the board later in the year.
That wasn't personal. That wasn't self-serving. That was educational curation of a library system. Binti is fantastic on a number of levels. First of all, because it's African futurism, where we have the foundation of the science fiction not from a Western perspective, but from a specifically Nigerian-centric perspective. Mm-hmm. And that Nigerian centrism drives not only the entire narrative, but it is there as a part of the main character's thought processes. And as a part of that, I mean, she's undergoing trauma. She's changing as a person physically mentally. And as she is kind of feeling out this person she is becoming as she is changed, and some of that is not within her own control. Like, she, in some aspects, wakes up changed. And she's still fundamentally focused on these questions of culture. That part of her journey is who she is as a person of her culture. And as she re-enters her culture, it goes back to her family. It becomes especially important because she is changed and a person of this family and a person of this upbringing and a person of this tribe. And so I think it's a fascinating book because it explores something that is so fundamentally human in respect to transhumanism, that no matter what around her change, she still clings to these parts of who she is and her tradition.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how much, I can't remember how much it gets into the transhumanism side of things. Definitely gets into like technology affecting the average human day. But I would also recommend another piece of fiction by Nnedi Okorafor that is a short story called Mother of Invention. I believe it's free to read on the internet somewhere. I will get a link for it to be put in the show notes later, but very, very good African futurism kind of thing. Very good.
And although I may catch hate from it from certain people on this podcast right now, I do want to make mention of Dune by Frank Herbert.
Dude, I told you not to do that when Ashley was on. Darn, geez.
Did you? Oh, I forgot. No, I didn't.
No, I didn't. I didn't do that at all.
Well, we do, likes and dislikes aside, or how many times it's taken all of us to try to get through the book, myself included. But we do see several examples of how human beings have been altered to fit various needs in the series, because this book takes place in a far future where advanced machines and computers have been outlawed. At some point in humanity's past, there was an AI uprising, and so those are completely done away with. But this is now...
the computers are afraid people were going to take their jobs.
Oh, that's right. There you go. But this is an interstellar human species. So now we have altered humans in the form of mentats who can think faster than any computer can, do millions of calculations. We have the Bene Gesserit, who are a mess unto themselves. And we have guild navigators. These are people who just, through genetic alteration, think faster than computers. They can read thoughts and move objects through the vastness of space. In fact, even due to genetic engineering and the application of certain herbs and spices, their messianic figure comes about to be the Kwisatz Haderach.
Well, I think that's one thing that is really interesting about Dune, is that it doesn't focus on a lot of human alterations of the genetics, like in terms of genetic engineering. It is all either eugenics in terms of breeding, and it's really focused on drugs, which is something that we really should take a look at, because while Dune is intended to be an exaggeration of these ideas, it does introduce the idea of what do we do to change ourselves chemically, and what can we do to change ourselves chemically to achieve something more. I mean, and this might sound like I'm being weird, like, well, yeah, we all know drugs are bad, kids, don't do drugs. But part of where we are headed pharmacologically is trying to fix the aging bug. I mean, and that is sci-fi, but it's also a dinner conversation that I had. I mean, it's I was talking with somebody whose master's thesis was about pharmacological opportunities to fix genetic errors and to stop the genetic errors that are tied to aging. So it's a thing that is being worked on currently. So I think that as much as Frank Herbert might have some pretty wild conclusions, it's also something that we need to look at in respect to this.
And it's been something we've been thinking about for a long time. When we think about the character of Captain America He was a 80-pound weakling who suffered from a variety of medical issues and could be blown over by a gust of wind. Enter in the super soldier formula, and suddenly he's a 6'8" super soldier who can punch Hitler in the face every weekend.
Yeah, see, kids, performance-enhancing drugs are good for you.
Yeah.
It's
As
interesting
long
because
as they're given to the pure of heart.
Right.
yeah, it's really interesting because I did read an argument from an ethicist who had raised the question, well, why do we ban performance enhancing drugs? We go to see competitions for superhuman people to do superhuman things. Well, as long as it's within the limits of safety, why don't we let them? Why don't we let people be as superhuman for our entertainment as we'd like? Now, granted, there are some problems that need to be examined with this perspective. But the reason why I raise it is a perspective that is out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with that specific perspective, it's, are we watching sports for the purpose of not glorifying but showcasing, you know, pure human ability, or is it more from the audience perspective of entertainment? What is our goal with this specific set of activities that we do? I personally lean towards showcasing pure human ability side of things, and maybe that's because maybe that comes from my rugby playing years. I don't know, but I think it's yeah, like, do we play sports because it's fun to play sports, or do we play sports because it's fun to watch other people play sports?
Oh, no, there's a question.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I think there's something really disembodied about thinking of our bodies solely as tools or forms of entertainment.
Yeah.
Like, they certainly can provide those things, but I think this is where sometimes transhumanism can get kind of Gnostic in a lot of ways. And I see this in Dune, and part of the reason why I think I struggle with it is, and granted, you know, I'm appreciating it more than I had the other 7 times I tried reading it, but because you see Paul go from a society that is rather Gnostic in their approach to human physicality to have to be a part of a community that is deeply acquainted with their physicality by virtue of them trying to survive every day. And so then him becoming, you know, the savior of that community is kind of interesting. But one of my theology professors in seminary, she constantly, Dr. Cherith V. Nordling, she's incredible. But one thing that she constantly said to us is, you don't have a body, you are a body. Remember that. You don't just have this flesh casing, you are this. And that's part of what makes you human. So I think that's what often makes me sort of like stand back and question how we treat our bodies and how we're talking about them, especially, you know, in narrative. What does this suggest about my physicality? Are they suggesting this is a good thing to have or a bad thing to have? What is lacking according to this audience? And I think sometimes, you know, with regard to performance enhancing drugs and such, then that kind of limits our capacity for awe and wonder with regard to what people can accomplish or achieve, and doesn't allow for us to kind of be surprised in a lot of ways when people are born with just extreme abilities that we wouldn't have thought were possible.
Mm-hmm.
I have a counter observation that a lot of the, not universally, but many transhumanist ideas are talking about the exaltation of the physical anatomy, that it's in a way kind of anti-Gnostic, where they're saying this is the body that we have and we want to make it the best that it absolutely can be. Now, there are certainly transhumanist currents of we're going to discard the body, but those are likewise not universal.
Sure, yeah, I'm more speaking towards the Dune narrative that was brought up with regard to like enhancing the brain and you know, becoming more of a supercomputer than one currently is.
Right.
Sorry, I'm racking my brains because I feel like there is a very specific piece of media, and I've forgotten the title, but it deals with sort of humans as supercomputers. and the idea that a modified human brain could run better than any sort of other computer, and it is bothering me that I cannot remember.
Well, that sounds a little bit like McCaffrey, the brain ships.
Maybe this was
The
a
ship who
TV
sang?
show.
There was an episode of Star Trek Enterprise where the ship had been damaged. It found an alien automated repair facility. One of their crew they thought died, but actually found out that he was kidnapped. And when they located him, he was in a room where, to augment its computing power, this automated station had linked together all the brains of all of these different people.
That sounds really cool. I think I'm thinking of a Doctor Who episode. And I want to
That
say it
would
was the
make
one with
complete
Simon
sense.
Pegg in it. I think it was the one with Simon Pegg in it, but I think I
yes,
might
it was a
also be
space
wrong.
station, and it was with not David Tennant, but the person before David Tennant.
Eccleston.
Yes, Christopher Eccleston.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that particular type of narrative also gets back into sort of like I think what Ashley was talking about before with seeing the problems with seeing the body as a tool and not as you, or at least part of you.
Mhm.
Yeah. You know, I feel like as much as I was like really drawing on that one specific image, I still feel like it's shown up a bajillion other times in other pieces of media. Not gonna lie, I always love to see it because I love to tear it apart.
And we touched briefly a little earlier when discussing transhumanism, the narrative of it, and transhumanist ideas about the merging of mind and machine, of a computer. And one of my favorite movies from the 80s, the movie Tron. And of course, there was the sequel, Tron Legacy, that came out, which I also really enjoyed. It shows a literal merging of a person and a computer.
Mm-hmm.
through fantastic science fiction means. And then we see the more moral implications of it in the sequel, where the character Flynn is trying to create the perfect system, but then his entire core values are changed when he encounters the characters of the ISOs, life forms that have just been kind of created by the code of the program he's running. And encountering them makes him challenge everything he's ever believed about, because they really are kind of a combination of technology and technological and the biological. And he sees that this could be the future of humanity. You know, he even phrases it as such, a digital frontier to reshape the human condition. And we talked earlier about the idea of downloading one's memories or one's consciousness, everything that makes up oneself, into a computer and continuing life that way. It's fun science fiction. It's brought up in Star Trek and in several other shows as well. But frankly, it's one that kind of scares me.
Yeah.
Why does it scare you, James?
Well, there's a lot of things that scare me, Michael. Just add this to the list. It's up there with, sharks, needles, and snakes. But
if you want to get really scared, I read the Rudy Rucker's Where tetralogy, which covers a lot of this ground. And the first human whose consciousness is uploaded, the robots decide, okay, well, we need a liaison between ourselves and the humans. So we're going to kidnap this human and take microscopic slices of his brain and scan them and reconstruct the brain in a robot, which of course is the size of like a huge truck, because computers were not, this was written back in 79, 80 or something like that. So it's like, okay, yeah, that's terrifying.
yeah,
Just gonna remove his brain and slice it up and scan it.
Along those lines, one step between now and Tron and sliced up brains, is the idea of virtual reality. We're seeing virtual reality become more and more commonplace in people's houses with the Oculus Rift, which, not going to lie, ever since that latest Star Wars game came out, I'm really kind of wanting one. You see virtual reality centers pop up in Dave & Buster's and theme parks. And Brian in the last episode was talking about the anime Sword Art Online, which, once again, it's fantasy, but you could almost also see how that could be the next logical step in where the technology goes, and in which case the next step beyond that would be a true merging of man and machine. And
I gotta admit, I'm first in line
as-
for a brain jack.
as much as Sword Art Online is a pretty good avenue to examine that kind of thing, I have not watched it, but I'm gonna take a hard stance right here. Gun Gale Online did a better job.
Oh, Gun Gale Online was great.
Oh, Gun Gale Online is fantastic. I refuse to watch Sword Art Online for many reasons.
Okay.
But I think I like Gun Gale Online better because it's literally a really famous Japanese author looking at Sword Art Online saying, wow, what a cool concept to explore this interesting idea. You did a terrible job. I can do it better. Pay me to do it. Because that's literally what Sword Art Online is. And so I think without having seen Sword Art Online, Gun Gale Online does a fantastic job of taking some interesting ethical questions and taking a pretty positive stance toward some of the applications of virtual reality, such as severe body dysmorphia. The main character of Gun Gale Online, she is very tall, and she hates that about herself and thinks of herself as a very short person. And so she goes through game after game after game trying to find one that will let her be very small until she finds one that the setting doesn't really appeal to her at all, but it's a very dark, sort of grim, dark, far sci-fi future where you have to shoot up a bunch of really scary aliens or whatever, but it lets her look the way that she thinks of herself as looking. Sorry for that terrible sentence construction there. I'm not going to go back and fix it. So I think that, yeah, there are some really squeaky implications with straight up downloading yourself into a computer, but I think it could also be used in certain therapeutic contexts, like for those who have severe body dysmorphia. You get to look at yourself more physically the way that you want to be able to look at yourself.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because in the Sword Art Online season that comes up right after Gun Gale Online, a character is introduced who, in the game, she's seen as extremely powerful. Everyone's wondering who she is. And the big reveal happens when it's discovered that she spends so much time in the game because she's actually suffering from, Brian, you may have to help me with this. I don't know if they're specific in what disease she's suffering from, if it's cancer or something else.
Said, and now I don't remember what it was.
But basically, she's 100% bedridden, months to live. When she is awake, she has
she had AIDS.
She had AIDS. Okay, she was
in terminal stages of AIDS.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of pain, and they basically hooked up one of those neurospheres. I don't know what they're called. They let her be in the game almost 20 plus hours a day, because in there she can have something resembling a life.
And it blocks her pain receptors.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I appreciated about Gun Gale Online specifically was that at the end of the story, there was a synthesis of the character that Len at some point stopped seeing her height as a problem.
Yeah.
And she actually says that at some point that, oh, you know what? I didn't even realize that I was looking down on you, because she's internalized the lessons that she's learned in the game about her own worth.
All right. Do we want to move on from pop culture and tackle some other stuff?
I think we should.
Yes.
Yeah. Like the fact that you can get a microchip kidney, because honestly, the microchip kidney is like the reason I wanted to be on this episode, because oh my goodness, it's so cool.
Okay, I think you just need to dive right into that, because that's news to me.
Okay, the microchip kidney thing. So I've seen no updates on it since 2017, which is a crying shame. But like, what a concept. Actual technology that we have at least some evidence for that works. So it's this microchip that some guy invented at some university somewhere. I can't remember the name. But it uses your own blood flow to make kidney tissue that filters your blood. And it's sort of, your blood flow basically uses your blood flow kind of as a motor to stimulate your own cells to generate this tissue. Is that not the coolest thing in the world? I think it's so cool.
The Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville.
Thank you.
That's incredible.
It's amazing. I love it. I'm so excited. Because I literally found out about this technology a couple of months after a family friend died of kidney failure. So I was just like, well, that would have been nice.
Yeah.
But here we are. Okay. But yeah, anyway.
For our listeners' sake, we've decided to head into the area where we're actually discussing transhumanism in our current modern world. But the microchip kidney, I'm like, no, go with that right now because that sounds cool.
And, to bring it back to Star Trek, that was what was going on in that scene where the woman says, the doctor gave me a pill and I grew a new kidney.
Dialysis. It's like living in the dark ages.
Well, and that actually is kind of one question of transhumanism. And granted, I haven't prepared a whole lot in this dynamic, is that we wouldn't imagine taking a pill and now my kidney works as transhuman. There's like, oh, that's just restoring the function that we already have. But there is some question in terms of, are we already living the transhuman experience? With the advance of technologies, what would we look like to our earlier forebears? What part of this looks more like wizardry than science as we get to shrug off problems that were lethal just 500 or 1,000 years ago?
I've been thinking about this a lot recently because I'm going to try not to get political here, but regardless of your opinions of his political stances, I've been reading a lot of Pyotr Kropotkin, the basically inventor of modern anarchism. And this guy was alive in around the 1800s, and his book, The Conquest of Bread, starts off with, "Isn't it cool that we have electrical lights now?"
Right.
And like the entire beginning of the book is just him gushing about how cool it is that we have steam power, we have electrical lights. What are we doing growing our plants outside? We can grow everything inside now and make it easy. I'm like, oh wow. Like, what would happen if you just picked up this man who looks like Santa Claus and dropped him in, the middle of today? Like, compared to, what the average Victorian would do, which would probably be like, where's your nearest fainting couch, and pass out. I think Kropotkin would have been like, this is so cool. And he would have been, really super duper happy about it. So, yeah, this is a thing I've been thinking a lot in terms of like the way that we look to, even a few decades ago. I think we're well into some level of transhumanism. Like, and we actually have prosthetics that have some amount of roboticism to them already, and we can 3D print them. Oh my goodness, 3D printing is such.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And also the question is not a matter of, can we put a microchip inside somebody's skull? The question is, how many people out there have microchips in their skull restoring some sort of function?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, cochlear implants, just for one example.
Yeah.
And back to the 3D printing, I remember reading an article a couple of years ago how I think it was a university in Minnesota had released a method on 3D printing human skin for application for immediately, but for those who were in car accidents and for severe burn victims. And it blows my mind. And my thought was that's just the begin. If we can do even something close to that, or even if it's just something to hold the skin together while real skin grows back, that's just the beginning. That's just the start, and it's just going to keep getting more advanced as we go.
I mean, I'm pretty sure we've already 3D printed a heart. I'm not sure it was a human heart. I think it might have been a pig heart, but I'm pretty sure we've already 3D printed like a whole dang organ, a complete one. It looked really weird. It was all white, like because there was no blood in it or anything. So
Wild.
Mr. Felix, we know you're in a bad accident, but don't worry. Your spleen was destroyed. We're printing you up a new one right now. And then from the next room, I start to hear a dot matrix printer fire up. This is going to take a while.
please just hold your stomach closed for
Yeah.
Well, it's done printing, but we need to let it cure for 48 hours.
Yeah.
But we've given you a smart pill, which will keep the edge off, which is another thing I read about was programmable smart pills, which can be changed for whatever medical concern you're swallowing them for based on a human's biology and for whatever specific need that you have. And once again, how close are we to? I mean, I know there are variations of that happening right now, but how long until the whole medical practice and pharmaceutical market is thrown into chaos because you no longer need 1,000 different chemicals being put together in 1,000 different ways to come up with the drugs you need. You just need one programmable pill.
Well, I think these things aren't going to be so revolutionary. I mean, it's a gentle slope. I mean, I've got a device right now that I'm wearing. It's a little bit of wire and glass that lets me see things that are further away.
What is this witchcraft you speak of, Brian?
Well, I mean, it does kind of hit on a joke from Sparks Nevada, Marshall on Mars, where there is, which I love that bit. And there is the Marshal holding a cyborg at gunpoint. And, you know, the Marshal has some prejudice against cyborgs. And so the cyborg is talking about, well, what does it mean to be a cyborg? But, well, what if I had lenses that allow me to see better than I already do? And he's like, well, if you wear that inside your skull rather than out, then you're a cyborg. And he's like, well, you've just described contact lenses. And I mean, and while that's meant to be, you know, funny and all that, there is something to be said about this is the gentle slope. We take for granted wearables. We take for granted that there are things that we do integrate for restorative purposes. And someone had recently put in the show notes the Neuralink, which is about the size of a quarter that sits level with your skull. You can flap your scalp over it and still grow hair and everything. And its current technological level is that of a Fitbit in your skull that can read, that can detect, I don't think as of yet can deliver neurological impulses, but it can detect neurological impulses to let you open doors, operate a mouse, things of that sort.
They've done early invasive operations on pigs where it actually is transmitting into the brain. As far as I know, the Neuralink company itself is an Elon Musk thing, and they haven't done any human work that I'm aware of, but there are similar technologies to what you describe from some other companies.
So essentially, these things are not just bits of science fiction; they're happening.
Yeah, my husband came home from work one day and he was telling me about one of his coworkers who's in sales, so she makes bank because she's very good at her job. But she was describing to him this. It is a wearable microchip that doesn't necessarily embed into your skin. Well, there's a very minuscule needle that goes into your upper arm to track your blood sugar and stuff, specifically not necessarily for any sort of medical purpose other than for general health, because then it tracks it all on this app that she has on her phone to help her regulate her diet more. Yeah, and he's like, isn't this cool? I know that we've been trying to monitor our health more. Do you want one? I was like, nah, hard pass, fam. I'm okay.
Yeah.
And he's like, why? And I was like, well, one, how expensive is it? And they were, because you have to rotate them out. You don't just have one and you're done. And they were like,
no.
yeah, and they were like $300 a pop. And I was like, so if that doesn't slow you down, I have questions. But additionally, a lot of my suspicion when it comes to any of this, because it is the gradual slope that makes me nervous. If something was just and here's a thing, I'd be like, okay, that's a specific difference between what we have now and what we have then. But it's the slow burn that always makes me nervous.
Yeah, for me, I'm even too nervous to dive into Fitbits,
right?
Because for me, it's the data thing.
Exactly.
I am not comfortable with some company having that much data on my dang body.
Right, exactly.
Like my own me.
Yeah,
if it helps,
exactly.
I'm actually wearing a Fitbit, and all this company is learning about me is how I am so lazy.
Yeah,
Well,
fair.
I mean, that's one aspect, but there's also, and this kind of gets into some of the philosophical concerns, because the philosophical concerns that we have with these enhancements, whether they're wearables or whether they're under our skin, they're examinations of problems that already exist. The reason why you don't want the company having this much information is because, surprise, surprise, Cambridge Analytics.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, people have not been shown to be trustworthy with the things that are at this point now closest to our bodies.
Yeah.
And this gets even worse when we have some of the vices of corporate America working their way into our health. And I don't want to be the kind of doom and gloom, oh my gosh, this could be so horrible, the sky is falling, the world is burning down. But we've had companies that have said, we have this brand new cancer screening, we are testing it, we are developing it, we're a startup, we're pushing this really hard, we're fundraising, we have these patients, see, we have all these cancer screenings, see, we have these cancer screenings, we're getting such great results. And it turns out that the fundraising was the more important part, and they weren't being transparent about the fact that their data was actually crap, and a lot of these people did have cancer and didn't go to their doctors for their regular cancer screening because they were going to this company for their cancer screening. And now, surprise, surprise, a lot of them have cancer and are getting treatment too late.
Yep.
Yeah. I think there's also a particular plot device that I think, okay, I recently read the audiobook of Cory Doctorow's Attack Surface. I have some mixed feelings on the actual quality of the writing, but it asked some interesting questions, less to do with transhumanism, more to do with where we are with data collection. But I think it also applies to the transhumanism thing. We can hack a car now. Cars have many computers in them now.
Mhm.
We can hack a car. What happens if we can hack like a pacemaker? Like I am as cool as I think it would be to have robot legs to move super duper fast. What if somebody else could move my robot legs for me?
Mhm.
I'm not comfy with that.
Let's just turn the Wi-Fi off. You'll be fine.
Well, I actually read an article a couple years back about there's a research group somewhere, I think it was in Switzerland, that is actually preemptively working on firewalls and antivirus for the brain-computer interface.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
It's like this technology doesn't exist yet, and they're already thinking about this is going to be really bad when people hack it.
Because
Well-
someone's going to try. That's
Yeah.
that's not even a question.
It's going to be 4 days in.
And let me tell you, if there's ransomware on my legs, I'm going to pay it.
Yep.
Or worse, your optic nerve.
Or your
Ew.
pancreas.
Or
Yeah.
Really.
kidney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kidney, yeah.
Darling, I think my bladder's been hijacked. Why? Reasons. So let's talk about what we want to address. What that is left.
I'm going to defer to our guests because they're our guests. Now, I want to make sure, is there anything here that Jenny, Ashley, that you want to make sure that we hit?
I think we've already covered the vast majority of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at various times.
Yeah. Like there's nothing here that I feel like I can't lose. Like in Star Trek, we do have the ship of Theseus question with tech and brains.
Well, actually, I do want to ask about that a little because I want specifically Ashley's input on if we have this situation where a person's consciousness has been transferred, or they've suffered a horrible accident and 98% of their body has been replaced by computers. There's a definite spiritual concern there. I mean, obviously, this is not a question that can be answered. I understand that. But at what point do you start wondering, okay, well, what is this person's relationship with God like now that their consciousness has been duplicated?
Yeah. No, that's kind of always my question. Whenever anybody or any sort of effort is made to be, and not to say that this is like a conscious effort, that this is what they're thinking about as they make these advances, but it's the consideration I'm constantly having while people make these advances is, how much do we want to differentiate ourselves from Christ already? And I'm not saying that like in a sort of uppity, pious way, as if I am doing such a great job at emulating it. But just in the sense of like, okay, how much of my, human experience do I want to already differentiate in a way that has, or when we already have differentiated so much. So I think the tactile and the physical are inherently important to understanding and communing with God. So I really, especially Gnosticism specifically. So the idea of, separating ourselves from our physicality, something that I really struggle with. I'm not personally not comfortable with it. As far as wanting to be able to commune with our loved ones and prolong their life, I understand that impulse, but I can't say that personally I feel like it's a particularly wise decision, because it's completely adapting and changing what our experience of this life, of this mortal coil is. But granted, until I'm ordained and, have my first parishioner that rolls up on their robot body, like I'm going to have to take that as it comes. I certainly wouldn't treat them any differently. I'd still give them the pastoral care that is required, and I would suss that out with them personally. So I think any sort of, theorizing I can do, I think would ultimately come off as probably far more callous than I'm meaning to be, and certainly far more callous than I would ever be with any one individual. These are just all the considerations and concerns I have anytime anybody makes any like drastic modifications to themselves that separates them from their own physicality, ultimately.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I have a very different take on this because of what and who I think God is, because I think of God in a very potentially heretical but very scientific kind of way. So I don't think about the removal or the removal of physicality as a thing that might separate a human from God or much of anything like that. I do have some concerns with like the want of some people to live forever, right, or to extend life super duper far, because I think that's just like you maybe need to examine your own dang self a little bit more.
I
I
find myself in a place where that idea is attractive to me, because death is a dark and a scary thing. But I have to keep reminding myself that my fear there, my desire to go on indefinitely, is a lack of trust in God.
Yeah, I think, for me, because I think of death as more of a swip swapping of which dimension my consciousness is in, rather than a complete and definite end, I am significantly less concerned about that side of things. Not to be all like high and mighty here, like, oh, I'm thinking better about this than you. Like, if I were to be told like, oh no, yeah, you're gonna die tomorrow, I'd be like, not yet.
Do not want.
I'm not done.
See, I might be the outlier here. It's the idea of stepping off of this mortal coil into eternity that scares the dickens out of me, because that's finitude, and ending is something that, okay, I'm comfortable with that. I understand what it means to end. You just do what you're doing and then not. Now you have the idea of existence forever, which is a thing I don't actually have a concept of. Yeah. So for me, like, dying is a trust in God for a very different reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it comes down to our but our mortal understanding of forever. Because we view it in a certain way, and it's almost too big for our minds as they are right now. But that's not going to be the case. Or I believe that that's not going to be the case when we are reunited with our Lord.
Mm-hmm.
One reason I talked earlier about the idea of merging conscience with a computer and living on that way scared me was because the limited function of existing in that way, it's not something I want to think about. And it also it took me a little bit to find it, but Hebrews 9:27, just as people are destined to die once, and after that to face judgment, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. I believe that forever is something that we're going to have to come into contact with one day. But when that day comes, our ability to comprehend it is going to be changed in a way that now we cannot begin to understand.
And I think that, when I ask the question of you, like, well, why does that scare you? I mean, I think that there is something that we have this immediate, at least a lot of us have this immediate reaction of downloading my consciousness into some sort of supercomputer. The idea, at least for me at first, is really, and I think I heard Ashley and Jenny and James all have the same, at least similar reactions. And I can't speak for y'all, but part of it for me, I think really goes back to one of Ashley's earlier points, that we have in our fiction this idea that, we just separate consciousness and physicality, like just pull those two apart. Harry Potter's soul gets sucked out of his body and he becomes a husk and the soul gets eaten. Okay, I'm comfortable with that. It's easy. It's right there on screen. I get it. And really this idea of separating consciousness and existing apart from the body is, in a sense, body horror.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea of us waking up and being a computer. Well, where is my body? But again, it isn't my body. It is you are a body.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's not you have a mind. You are a mind. And we can get a lot into mind-body dualism and a lot of the problems there, but we don't have problems when we're going to have time problems. We can dissect all that later.
You don't want to open up an entirely new conversation.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's where some of this fear factor comes from.
Yeah. I think that's all I've personally got, unless somebody else has something really, really cool they want to just drop in here.
No, admittedly, my blood sugar's low, so I'm starting.
Okay. All right. Do we just want to slide on into the zombie apocalypse strategy of the week?
Yeah, I agree completely.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Usually we also extend, if anybody has any silly zombie strategies, we extend that to guests if they want to jump in with that.
Okay.
If not, what's that?
I do not know.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I don't have any specific.
Oh, we're all gonna die then. I'm out.
we
No,
give
just
the
kidding.
zombies robot legs and we hack them.
Oh shoot, I like that better. No,
There you
just
go.
leave it. Just leave that. That's our zombie apocalypse strategy of the week. And then we go.
All right, I'll open up Visual Studio here and I'll get started on that.
Yeah, I just question then, how do we get the robot legs on them in the first place?
Brian's the VFX guy. He does it in post.
What if it was like a what are they called, punji traps, but
Yeah.
instead of the spikes in there, it's the legs.
No, because that's going to interfere with my grand plan. Once I hack the legs and have them under my control, I'm going to put on the soundtrack to Hamilton.
See, we also have a core of disreputable morticians that'll just do it before the apocalypse starts. Like they just
I feel like without even introducing it, we've already done the zombie apocalypse plan of the week.
Well, yeah, there it is.
There it is. It's done. That was easy. Well, unless there are any final thoughts on transhumanism or dancing zombies, which really a correlation could be made for the two, then I think that will...
Michael Jackson has something to say about that, I think.
We'll ask him once we get the robot legs attached. That is going to wrap it up for us this episode. First off, I want to extend a humongous thank you to Ashley and Jenny for joining us this episode. It has been a blast.
It
Hear,
has. Thank you very
you.
much for inviting us on. It's been a great time.
And please, once again, let our listeners know where they can find each of you online.
You can find me, Jenny, at stgcast.org on the Saving the Game podcast. You can find us there on Twitter at Saving the Game. If you want to follow me personally on Twitter, I don't remember my Twitter handle because I never have to type it out my own self.
It's
It's Ninja Wheel Slime.
Yeah.
Yeah, at Ninja Wield Slime on Twitter.
Which I imagine there's a story there, but we probably don't have time.
It's very boring. It's honestly so dang boring.
Then
It's
write
that
your
I
own
didn't-
fan
I
fiction,
didn't-
folks.
Okay.
I have
didn't
headcanon
want-
now, so
I didn't want the nickname that my friends gave me in grade 8, so I made one up, and I made it stick by force.
I support that decision.
Story.
You can find me on the MinMax podcast. If you just literally Google, I'm so bad at podcast chores. We usually make Alan do them. But you just Google the MinMax podcast and you'll find us on Stitcher and, the podcast app, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. MinMax Pod is all of our socials, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, minmaxpod@gmail.com if you want to email us, or you can send us a voicemail. It's very fancy. If you're looking for me personally, on Twitter is probably where I'm the most active, unless you want to see a lot of pictures of my cats. But on Twitter, I'm DEEDEE_K. And I just kind of tweet a lot of nonsense that people sometimes find funny.
And you can find us online at geekatarms.com, at facebook.com/geekatarms. And Mike, what's our Twitter?
We are at Arms Geek on Twitter.
And finally, from Brian, Mike, James, and Ashley and Jenny, we want to say be safe, be blessed, and be geeky.
Thanks for listening to Geek at Arms. Music for this podcast was provided by Incompetech.com. For more, check us out at Facebook.com/Geek at Arms. Give us a like and maybe even subscribe to us on iTunes. That would be awesome.
This is those long, awkward pauses I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, sorry.
We're just going to cut all those together into an awkward silent supercut.